Well, or
Good evening, everyone. I seem to be talking about the cervix one way or the other. And the topic is cervical insufficiency. This is what was described as cervical incompetence until recently, and the terminology has changed. It is defined as a painless cervical dilatation, recurrent second trimester, along with recurrent second trimester births or preterm labor, usually a live fetus, in the absence of other causes. Now, the ACOG definition is the inability of the uterine cervix to retain a pregnancy in the second trimester in the absence of uterine contractions. But I think all of us actually know what cervical incompetence is. It's just that it's a grossly overdiagnosed and overtreated condition. Now, what is the pathophysiology? There are some changes that actually take place in the cervix through pregnancy and labor. These are softening, ripening, by which we mean shortening, dilatation, and change in position. These are the components of the Bishop score as well. Now, dilatation in response to contractions and postpartum repair. Now, what happens in cervical insufficiency is that this process of ripening happens a bit too early. And especially the shortening. The normal shortening is minimal till 34 weeks, and then it occurs gradually. Whereas in cervical insufficiency, it occurs by 16 to 24 weeks. As you can see in this graph, you can see that this entire time there is not much changes. The cervix just becomes soft, which happens from the beginning of pregnancy. Actually, it's one of the signs of which we use for diagnosis. Whereas here, you can see that around 34 weeks is when slowly the ripening begins, and the dilatation then happens at term when the patient goes into labor, and lastly, the repair postnatally. It is when this ripening, which begins with shortening, happens early, that we diagnose a cervical insufficiency or cervical incompetence. All of us know the list of causes. Acquired causes would be any trauma to the cervix in whatever form, whether it is a tear following a spontaneous delivery or any surgery there. And congenital causes would be the collagen disorders, uterine anomalies, especially the biconvate and various other anomalies of the uterus, and in utero exposure to diethyl stilbestrol. How do these women with cervical incompetence present? When they are at risk for second trimester and delivery, or rather when they are going in for a second trimester loss, they present with pelvic pressure, cramping, backache. None of these are very definite symptoms, and you are usually in for a surprise when you put in a speculum and take a look. But they can present with this, and in somebody who has a history of who are at risk for a cervical insufficiency by way of previous cervical surgeries or previous second trimester loss or a preterm labor, when they complain of these symptoms, you need to definitely take it seriously, because all other women usually come and tell us, I have pelvic pressure, I have cramping, I have back pain. Which pregnant woman doesn't have it? Now, there can also be a vaginal discharge which is blood stained and probably a little thin. Those at risk for preterm labor or who are going into preterm labor, you again usually are asymptomatic but could complain of mild uterine contractions. But what clinches the diagnosis is when you do a physical examination, especially a speculum examination, not a digital, and you find the cervix is short or rather effaced, the internal os is open, and there could be bulging membranes. And even if the membranes are not bulging, when you apply either a suprapubic or a fundal pressure, you could, and wait for 2-3 minutes, you will see the membrane bulging, or when you ask the patient to perform a Valsalva maneuver. Now, how do we manage? I'm not going to great details of how the clinical presentation, because all of us know what it is. Now, the cervical management basically consists of cervical cerclage and cervical cerclage. There are various trials wherein people have tried bed rest and found that it works, but certainly not as good as cerclage. This cervical cerclage has been divided into 3: history indicated, ultrasound indicated, and physical examination indicated. Now, the history indicated ones are the ones which we apply based only on the history of a recurrent second trimester loss, but should be applied when there are more than 3 or equal to 3 second trimester losses, recurrent early preterm births, along with additional presence of risk factors. And the time at which we do it is around 12 to 14 weeks. Ultrasound indicated ones are the ones where you measure the cervical length before 24 weeks and find it to be less than 25 millimeters, and along with a prior history of PTB or a pregnancy loss. Please remember that the second point is very important, because when the cervix is short and there is no history of cervical trauma or a risk factor, and there is no history of a prior preterm birth or a second trimester loss, you do not apply a cervical stitch. Now, this is generally applied between, ultrasound indicated one is between 14 and 28 weeks. Here there is a controversy, I will discuss it later. You will find that most often the history and ultrasound put together, because whenever there is a history, we always tend to do an ultrasound examination as well. The last one is a physical examination indicated, by which we mean an emergency cerclage, which is what I am going to elaborate a little on today. Because there is no way you can examine a cervix physically when the woman is not pregnant or in the first trimester and say, yes, this lady needs one, unless there is an old tear or something like that. So here the cervix is more than 1 centimeter dilated and the membranes are probably prolapsed. And here you apply it again anytime between 16 and 28 weeks. Remember, singleton gestations should be managed differently from multiple gestations. So what I have said here, or I am going to say here, do not apply to multiple gestations, because the management there is quite different. There are a lot of controversies about whether you will apply a cerclage there or not at all. Now, transvaginal ultrasound measurement of cervical length. I just want to just have 2 slides on that, basically because it's a very, very important tool for diagnosis that we use. The bladder should be empty. A transducer should be advanced into the these are very specific guidelines for measurement of cervical length. It should be placed in the anterior fornix. The image should be enlarged to occupy 2/3 of the screen. Amniotic sac should be identified, and the external and internal loss on the cervical canal. Avoid excessive pressure, and you basically measure it. And you can see that. I am sure you people have seen any number of pictures. And if the cervix is curved, you have to measure it. You could measure it in 2 different segments. Now, when do we apply this history indicated cerclage? I have already said when there is a history of recurrent second trimester losses and other causes are ruled out, and similarly when there is a prior preterm birth. Remember, cervical length of less than 25 millimeters is found only in 40% of women with prior preterm birth. If a woman with history of prior preterm birth does not have a cervix which is less than 25 millimeters, and you apply a suture or a cerclage, the outcome is not improved. So you need to have this history, and you need to have the ultrasound finding of a short cervix. Or when I mean short, I mean less than 25 millimeter. If this combination is not there and you apply a cerclage, there is no improvement in outcome. So in a woman with a prior preterm birth or prior pregnancy losses, by measuring the cervical length and limiting your cervical cerclage application to only those with less than 25 millimeters in length, you avoid 60% of cerclages. That would be based on history alone. That is an important take-home message that I want to give you. Now, again, ultrasound indicated cerclage. In singletons without prior preterm birth, a short cervix, when you apply it, a meta-analysis shows only a non-significant benefit. But in singletons with the prior preterm birth and a short cervix, the meta-analysis of various randomized trials have shown significant reduction in the outcome when you apply a cerclage. So the take-home message, I again emphasize, when there is a patient with prior preterm birth or a prior second trimester loss, you have to have a cervix which is short before you can decide to apply. Physical examination indicated cerclage, which is what I have been asked to talk about today, is otherwise called an acute cervical insufficiency. Now, this is a mid-trimester defined as a mid-trimester cervical dilatation of more than 2 centimeters, visible membranes, and no other predisposing factors like rupture of membranes, labor, infection, or bleeding, chorioamnionitis or bleeding. Now, should we apply cerclage to these people, or should we just leave them alone? There are several randomized trials, and meta-analysis available. To quote a few, there's a review of 8 series published in 1995 on 249 women applying cerclage and comparing with no cerclage, and found that the neonatal survival improves to 64%. Now, comparison of bed rest and cerclage with cervical dilatation between 2 and 5 millimeters, the neonatal survival improved to 80% in a study published in 2001. Again, published in 1995 in women with cervical length of more than 4 centimeters. Even though there was no difference in the survival, the mean gestational age at birth could be postponed to 4 weeks. And in a setup where the neonatal survival or the neonatal intensive care facility may not be as good as in the Western countries, this achievement of 4 additional weeks is a very important factor in improving perinatal survival. But remember, so all the studies and the meta-analysis have shown that cerclage definitely results in an improved outcome when you have a patient who presents with acute cervical insufficiency, whether the cervix is 2 centimeters, 3 centimeters, or 5 centimeter dilated. But remember, poor outcome is associated with that is, the earlier the gestational age at which you apply, the more failure you have. More advanced cervical dilatation at the application of cerclage, the more failure you have. And if the membranes are prolapsed into the vagina through the external os, the failure rate is high. Now, Global Health Network for Perinatal and Reproductive Health study applied cerclage between 14 and 26 weeks, and again found a good outcome, and a randomized trial with membranes bulging beyond the external os also found an improved outcome with cerclage. Therefore, an emergency cerclage may be beneficial in women with cervical changes. Gestational age limit is not clear. Most of them define it as up to 24 weeks in the Western countries. That's because in the neonatal intensive care facilities, and the survival for babies beyond 34 weeks is much better in those countries, whereas here, where most centers have a survival benefit only, good survival rate only after 28 weeks, you can extend this cutoff to up to 28 weeks. Beyond 28 weeks, if you have somebody who presents with cervical dilatation and bulging membranes, there is no role for applying cervical cerclage. That is the second take-home message. So it should be limited to up to either 24 weeks or maximum 28 weeks. So 28 weeks, as I said, is more acceptable in India. Preterm labor can occur, remember, while placing or after application of cerclage. Hence, when you have a woman who presents under 24 or rather 28 weeks with minimal symptoms and cervix is 1 to 4 centimeter dilated, if there is evidence of infection by way of fever, malodorous discharge, or uterine tenderness, if there is a rupture of membranes, or if the woman is advanced labor more than 4 centimeter dilated, deliver her. If on the other hand, none of these are present, apply a cerclage, which prolongs the pregnancy by 1 month and definitely improves outcome. Now, what are the other issues here? About 50% of women with acute cervical insufficiency have subclinical chorioamnionitis. This is something that has been found and been reported by several authors. Now, women with subclinical chorioamnionitis have a shorter presentation to delivery interval. And how do we diagnose this? If there is clinical chorioamnionitis, you can say fever, foul-smelling discharge, and uterine tenderness. But the subclinical chorioamnionitis is difficult to diagnose. Amniocentesis has been proposed and is performed by several centers, and culture or gram stain for diagnosis of subclinical chorioamnionitis. But again, following meta-analysis, it has been found that there's not enough evidence to recommend it as a routine. So if you suspect infection, give antibiotics. If you don't, you don't. That's basically it. So how do we diagnose infection? You could diagnose it by ultrasonography by looking at the presence of sludge or membrane edema or separation of membrane from the decidua. but these are not sensitive markers, using an amniocentesis and measuring the glucose, gram stain or culture. This picture shows a little bit of sludge here, and this is indicative of a chorioamnionitis. Now, what are the contraindications to application of cerclage? Severe fetal anomaly, intrauterine infection, active bleeding, active labor, preterm premature rupture of membranes, and of course fetal death. How do we prepare these women preoperatively? You have to do an ultrasonography to exclude congenital anomalies, confirm the gestational age, and detect intraamniotic infection if you can. Is there a role for tocolytics? The role is controversial. There is no definite recommendation using isoxapirin or nifedipine. There have not been, people have not found any definite advantage and therefore not recommended as a routine. Should we give antibiotics? Again, ACOG 2011, there is no recommendation for antibiotics as a routine, but many people are very uncomfortable when the membrane is bulging and the cervix is dilated and you're putting a stitch there. People are very nervous not administering an antibiotic, so many of them use it. But if you use it, use a single dose of azithro, or if you suspect or want to cover group B streptococcus, maybe a single dose of ampicillin, and that is all you need. You don't need antibiotics for 5 days or 10 days or till delivery, certainly. Is there a role for indomethacin? Placement of cerclage is associated with a rise in prostaglandin levels, and this can induce uterine contractions. Indomethacin acts as a PG antagonist and prevents contractions and can be administered for 48 hours in emergency cerclage in the dose of 25 milligram 3 times a day. Studies have shown a non-statistical benefit for delivery under 32 weeks and under 35 weeks. There's no definite recommendation, but you wouldn't be wrong if you used it. How do we reduce prolapsed membranes? You could use a Trendelenburg position, which is what we all use, pushing the membranes with moist sponge on a holder. Foley's catheter can be introduced and inflated slowly, but be sure you don't rupture the membrane with the tip of the Foley's catheter, but it can be very gently placed inside, and as you inflate the bulb, the membrane would go in. Inflate the bladder with 1 liter of saline to lift the lower segment upwards and push the membranes up. You could use IV nitroglycerin to relax the uterus and therefore make the membranes recede. People apply silk stay sutures on the anterior and posterior lip of the cervix and pull it so that they can apply a stitch more easily. Amniocentesis to reduce intrauterine pressure has also been used, and many people actually use. There are no randomized control trials comparing any of these methods to reduce the bulging membrane, so it's an individual choice. You could use whatever you are comfortable with. Just to show you a picture where the membrane is bulging, and with the distension of the bladder, the membrane has gone up. I have not tried it. Short GA is what is usually used, short general anesthetic. Should we use Shirodkar or McDonald's? That is another question, because there are innumerable, if you look at the literature, there are innumerable trials using either Shirodkar or McDonald's and comparing the two. And basically, most people are comfortable using a McDonald's. Remember that it's easier. The placement of the stitch is a little lower in McDonald's because you're not pushing the bladder up, but the outcome is more or less similar. No significant difference has been found comparing the two methods in any of the randomized control trials, including a multicentric trial by Owen and Associates in 2009. Sutures, please remember that when you put in the McDonald's sutures, each stitch should be less than 1 centimeter apart. Putting one at the 3, 9, 6 and 12 o'clock position is not of much use. You need to have it 1 centimeter, and each stitch should be 1 centimeter apart. Only one suture is recommended, not two, one below the other. Again, a lot of people have used it and compared two sutures versus one and found that one is absolutely fine, and the sutures should be removed at 37 to 38 weeks. This is how it's placed. It's from a book, and I'm sure you all know how to do it. Post-operatively, what do we do? It is an outpatient procedure, and the patient can be discharged on the same or the next day. Avoid strenuous activity till delivery, and sexual activity is actually not recommended almost till delivery because the semen has prostaglandins which could actually stimulate labor. And so if the woman is going to resume sexual activity, make sure she uses condom. These are small things that we may not remember or know when we are managing these, and that is why I'm emphasizing them. And follow-up is with serial ultrasonography. Complications, all of us know chorioamnionitis, preterm labor, can set in while you are either applying it or immediately after. Cervix can continue to dilate. Do you want to put in a recirclage? Doesn't really work, and only very small series are available. If the woman pushes this baby through with the stitch there, cervical lacerations can happen. Scarring of the cervix and dystocia is very well known. Don't imagine that just because the cervix was dilating very happily before you put in the stitch, it's going to dilate as well. Sometimes there is scarring following the stitch and there may be dystocia. Rupture of membranes can happen, and the recommendation is to remove the sutures, especially if it is after 32 weeks. I just have another slide, I'm done. Maternal sepsis and mortality, rare but have been reported. Are there any alternatives? Bed rest has been tried with some success. Progesterone has been tried with no success. Special pessaries are being evaluated with some success. Thank you for your attention.